Good evening. My name is Tanya Burzovich, and I am chairing tonight's Education Committee meeting. With great respect and humility, we acknowledge and honor the lands of the Snuneymuxw people. The Snuneymuxw people maintain the profound, unique, and spiritual connections to the land through ageless traditions, teachings, stewardships, and expression of reciprocity. Are there any additions, deletions, or changes in order to tonight's agenda? Seeing none, I shall ask for a motion to approve the agenda. Please just use the chat box, as I can't always see hands on here. Moved by Trustee Stanley, if I can get a seconder. Seconded by Trustee Keller. Is there anyone opposed to the approval of the agenda? Thank you. Seeing none, we shall consider the agenda carried unanimously. And now we need to, I'm seeking a motion for the minutes of the Education Committee meeting held May the 5th, 2021. Trustee McKay, seconded by Trustee Higginson. Is there anyone opposed to accepting those minutes? Seeing none, the minutes are approved as presented. Please note that we did not have a June education meeting, and that is why there are no minutes from that meeting. And now we are going to have an update on summer outreach programs. I'm going to turn over the meeting to Deputy Superintendent Davey for introductions.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'm pleased to be able to introduce tonight Director of Instruction for Inclusive Education, Mr. Brian Ty, and Manager of Mental Health and Addictions, Ms. Lynn Brown. And just for the Education Committee, the introduction of Brian Ty. Mr. Ty is joining us within his role, new to the Nanaimo Ladysmith Public Schools, and is coming to us from Wetaskiwin, Alberta. And it's a great honor and pleasure to have Brian join us in the district and join the Department of Learning Services team. So I wanted to make that introduction, and you are all very familiar with Lynn Brown and the great work that she does for our district, and I'm very pleased that they're able to report and share out with you on the outreach work that was conducted this summer. So I will turn it over to Mr. Ty and Ms. Brown. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Well, my contract started on July 1st. I began attending learning services meetings in June as part of the transition plan into this position. I can say with knowledge that I am excited to be joining the Nanaimo Ladysmith Public Schools. We're an organization that's clearly focused on doing whatever it takes to make the best differences for our kids. And it's my pleasure to introduce what we've accomplished with our summer program this year, and for Lynn and I to be able to share that with you. Next slide, please. The reasons for this type of programming is very straightforward. It's designed to support the academic, social, and emotional learning. It reaches out to students and families in our communities who are being affected by the pandemic, the BC wildfires, and the ongoing discoveries of the tragedies associated with the residential school policies. It provides a means of connecting with local youth and helping them access their programs. It's designed to be nurturing, responsive to their mental health development. As you can see, it fits very well with what our board priority is, with local research, and that's really the foundation of the program. Next slide, please. What we'd like to be able to do for you is just take you through the program and have you have an opportunity to learn about the strategies that were in place and how they fit into the board priority and the appropriate objectives. So with that said, I'll turn it over to Lynn.
Next slide, please. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me. Next slide, please.
what we'd like to do here is just give you a little bit of an idea of how we are intentional with the program. With the outreach programs, one of the things that we wanted to do is say, with the board's direction, with the broad goal, at the same time as we drill down and look at the objectives, we wanted for you, as you're listening to the presentation this evening, really hear how the program is linked to the objective and our goal, our intent of increasing the number of students who feel welcomed, safe, and connected, and have a sense of belonging in their schools. Really at the heart of this, and a nice way to summarize it would be, it's about compassionate relationships.
Next slide, please. And the next slide, please. So this summer, I had the pleasure of working on the outreach team and wanted to share with you a little bit about who was included on that team. Luckily enough, ICE has their admin working throughout the summer, so I felt very supported with the backup of the ICE administration team. At the secondary site, which was at Woodlands Secondary School, we offered outreach as a drop-in center. So the kids came to Woodlands, and at Woodlands we had a number of teachers who volunteered to work on a rotating basis and one child youth family support worker. At the elementary site, we worked out of Fairview Elementary School, and I had a team there of 4 child youth family support workers. Next slide, please. You're muted, Brian.
As you take a look at this slide, we just wanted to get you to peek at the image on the right-hand side. Briefly, thinking about that graphic of the iceberg, what the image represents is that the visible strategies are inseparable from the program rationale, which isn't always evident at first glance. So we really wanted for you to be able to see how we've tried to ensure that how we're going about things is connected to what's important and why we're doing it.
So using the iceberg analogy, what people saw the outreach team doing was a variety of strategies. We did everything from soup to nuts, it felt like. We met up with people one-to-one. We tried to gather like-minded students together for small neighborhood meetups. We did larger events and field trips, including a wonderful excursion to the Wildwood Eco Forest. We provided barista training for secondary students at Woodlands so that every student who attended there was able to leave with a certification that would lead directly to employment. And one of the other things that we managed to achieve is building connection with caregivers who may have had their own trauma history when it came to schools. And it's really that connection that has allowed us to build the bridges required to maintain that connection and get kids back into school in September. There were a number of secondary students who managed to do some credit recovery with the teachers at Woodlands. And I'm proud to say that every student that was referred received a minimum of 3 attempts for contact. We actually went out and knocked on doors, we sent texts, we emailed, and we called. And we often had connections with families that principals had not seen for very many months during the pandemic. And the underlying rationale, the stuff under the water that was less obvious to see, included our whole reason for being there, which was to rewrite the script when it came to connection to school and to allow folks to realize that School District 68 really cares about everybody, that we brought food, that we drove miles and miles to see kids, and that we listened to their preferences of their activities and we responded to their needs. What we tried to do was increase that sense of attachment and hope that it will translate into better attendance in September. Next slide, please. So how do we know that it worked? We had 100 elementary students referred and 40 secondary students, and the kids showed up. At the Woodlands site, we had students attending the drop-in from every secondary school in the district, including Cedar, including Ladysmith. We heard things from students like, I hate school normally, but I like this. And I've never come to school this often. As I mentioned, we made connections with kids who were referred. The card on the right is the card that we created. Our final version has actually a door hanger so that we could go out, write our phone number on this card and hang it on doorknobs and let people know that we came by and knocked on their door. One of the strengths of the program really has been in the continuity of the staffing. We've had very key CYFSWs attached to this type of work, and I am proud and happy to say that we have been able to maintain and continue that into the fall. Kids who had high levels of anxiety about transitioning into a secondary school, luckily we were able to meet with them and provide them one-to-one individualized tours of their secondary school and be able to introduce them to the secondary counselor who will be greeting them this week. And those tours managed to reduce anxiety and allow kids to see what their next chapter would all look like. Next slide, please. And here's how I know that it worked. I'm going to get a little teary maybe. I see Laura's suggestion that we use Fairview School was just so bang on. So it was kind of hot this summer. And my time to start in the morning was 8 o'clock, and at 5 to 8, I had all the doors open to the multi-purpose room. And one day I was setting up my computer. The rest of the team didn't come until 8:30 when this giant fat cat rolled into the multi-purpose room. And I'm not an educator, but I'm pretty sure that there aren't fat cats allowed inside the building. So I picked up the cat to take it outside. And on the doorstep were these two little girls, ages 11 and 12, no shoes, hair all over the place, and wanted to know why the doors were open at Fairview School and said, hey, what are you guys doing here? So of course I brought them in and showed them all the different things that we could be doing there. And it included access to the gym. We had beautiful art supplies. We had new balls that you could kick as hard as you want against the wall. And from that stop in, over 20 kids from the Fairview neighborhood started showing up. And that was an organic interest in what we had to offer. So we had to pivot, and instead of going out every single day all over the district, we actually built in 2 drop-in sessions so that the kids in the neighborhood could roll in, get something to eat, have a bit of connection with a caring adult, and do some activities. I went out to Old Navy and bought some flip-flops, $2 flip-flops, and the girls came back and were able to shop for flip-flops. And to me, that organic grassroots self-referral indicator was our strongest sign that it really was the right thing to do. Thank you for your time. You're still muted, Brian. I don't know if your lips were moving.
They were just quietly saying how much I appreciated, Lynn, the work that you did and the staff, because I did have an opportunity to visit the sites and you could just see how the kids were engaged. What was also amazing was seeing how the staff were engaged with the kids and going back to that underlying thinking about the program. Those attachments were forming, and what we know about that thinking in literature is pretty straightforward. Every time, the best way to support and build attachments is to start with initially a successful attachment. And for kids to be having that positive relationship with school staff, what a great way to encourage them to be ready for what was next, which is the return to the fall. So I saw that in action, and it was one of the best things about working over the summer. So thank you very much for that.
Madam Chair, if I might just add, first of all, thank you to Mr. Ty and Ms. Brown for their presentation this evening, and I would also like to extend my gratitude and thanks to the leadership of Ms. Brown, Lynn, did a fantastic job, both through this project and supporting our students through the summer programs, both the outreach at elementary and secondary levels, and as we're fully aware, all of the support and leadership that was provided last summer in terms of our food distribution center and the work there. So it's fantastic to have the guidance and the leadership that was provided. And I also had opportunity to get around to the Woodland site and the Fairview site, and on multiple occasions just to say hello and visit. And the number of students that were connected in there, it again met the mandate and the principle as to why this program was in place, supported by the board through the summer. And I'll just add, with the transition of students from the former Nasika-Kumtuks and former Sawak programs, we had students attending both the elementary and the secondary program from both of those programs that were transitioning through our school district here. So I'm very pleased with the work. Thank you.
That's excellent. Thank you very much. I see Trustee McKay would like to make a comment. And then Trustee Stanley has a question.
Thank you. I'm not sure where to begin. So I will begin by echoing what both Brian and Tim have shared, in that I too had a chance to go out, maybe not at the schools. I actually was out at a field trip that many of the elementary students and a couple of the high school students had been on for one day. And it's interesting to see. It's actually more than interesting. It's quite incredible to watch the connection between the adults that were in the program working with these students, and how much the students just were so filled with joy and love in their time that they were spending with these adults. And I know that for us as a board, we talk about how often we talk about the objective of having students know that they're connected to people who care about them, in particular the adults. And that was so evident based on the activities that were happening, just the way they're sharing with each other, bringing each other along, you know, student to student, student to teacher, student to worker. It was magic, absolutely magic to behold. And I guess I just want to encourage the board to always keep this in mind. It was an astounding success to see it in operation, and to actually see the board's values lifted up and come to life. It's not just an idea on a paper, it truly came to life. And so I just wanted to share that with my fellow trustees, considering, you know, where do we go next with these types of programs and how important they are when you can see what a significant difference they made for students. So I just want to thank everybody for the work that happened, and encourage my fellow trustees to continue thinking about these types of programs for our students in our district. Thank you.
All right, question. And I completely agree with you, Trustee McKay. It was this is excellent work. Question from you, Trustee Stanley.
Hi, yes. Yeah, I want to say lots of things. This is very, I mean, this is the work that I love and think is super important. Establishing relationships with youth and helping them kind of develop engagement in schools is kind of the primary stuff that we need to do. So thank you. I wanted to ask a question, and it, you know, you can call me out if I'm putting you too much on the spot, but I'm a research nerd. So on your page that talks about why are we doing it, and you've got the three, I think they're reports. I was wondering what so the McCrary Center, that's actually the one I'm more kind of asking about, but I kind of wanted to know what those pieces of, I assume, research were, what you wanted to say from those. So I didn't quite understand why those references were there on the page. And I'm really curious if there's any information about kind of like what the latest research is kind of telling us. So do you have any insights from that knowledge that you've learned from looking at those documents? Is kind of like from that mental health perspective, I'm wondering what they're saying.
Sure, I'll take us through that. So the top of that slide mirrors the bottom. So the academic learning is inseparable from social emotional learning. CASEL does an excellent job of providing a really solid literature base that kids who are valued and when people believe in them, when they're being cared for socially, emotionally, are able to better regulate, and when they're regulating better, they're in a space to learn. So that reference to the CASEL is with regards to that. The Ministry of Education's Key Principles and Strategies for K-12 Mental Health Promotion in Schools is really the publication that came out this summer that connected us to ensuring that we're, as a system, understanding how our kids are returning to school. And so their work was about recognizing not provincially, it's not just about the pandemic, but also we have families in our local area who are connected to people who are experiencing loss because of the fires. It's just one more piece of the puzzle. So the stressors are building on families. And I think when we look at that mental health reference from the province, it just reminds us that the capacity for kids to cope is strained, but also the capacity for all of us is under strain. We need to keep that in mind and find ways to break that down. So that positive work at the relationships, the connections this summer is just putting a dent in that. The information that came out of McCreary, that when I looked at the report, the one that I was really picking up on was just our youth are telling us through that survey that they're not getting the help they need. And there's challenges to that because part of that could be we're not making it safe to talk about mental health and the issues associated with that. So we know that when kids have adults who they trust, that's a big step towards opening the door to let the adults know that they're in need of help. It might not be that a student or a youth would go directly to a health center, but with a trusted adult that might be able to accompany them, and we have those kinds of roles, and we have those folks working in the programs this summer. Let's build those connections and see where they might lead. So that connectedness to an adult who cares was what we were thinking about when we were looking at the McCreary information.
Great. Thank you. Tanya, you're muted.
Great. Trustee Stanley, you have a follow-up. I apologize.
It's okay.
I had a slight mic issue.
So I have a lot of respect for what the McCreary Center tries to do and a fair amount of familiarity with it. So I basically want to put out there that if you think, I'm really excited to see the McCreary Center information specific to Vancouver Island. I know they go by regions. I haven't heard much here on the island about the McCreary Center, partially because they haven't, it's their cycle of conducting the research that has related to that. So if you kind of in the future think that there's anything useful for the board, I know I'm just one person, but I think that from a mental health perspective, if there's anything that you find that would be useful for us to know, I would sure love to hear about that in the future. So I just appreciate that you're bringing that to our attention, and obviously also appreciate the fact that you're rooting your work and the research as well as the clinical connections. So I value that, both sides of that. So I appreciate the work very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? All right, seeing none, I just want to again reiterate what a exceptional presentation that was, and just how exciting this work is. This is really, as Trustee Stanley said, this is what it's about. I come from a background in child and youth care, and I remember when I first started trying to get people to understand that you cannot get kids to care about their academic stuff if they don't feel like you care about them as people. You know, the relationships is the heart of everything we do. Yeah. So thank you very much. All right. Our next item on the agenda is 8.2 school startup, and that is going to be Assistant Superintendents Tate and Belcom.
Hello, everyone. Dawn, do you want me to start? Jump in?
Yeah, you go ahead.
Would you like to start? Okay. Okay, thank you so much for having us this evening and allowing us this time to share a little bit about school startup, although it's only sort of day 2, kind of 1 with, full day with kids in there. So from the elementary perspective, it has been an overwhelming successful start. I've spoken to or connected to every principal, vice principal at the elementary level, and it's a lot of positives. So I'll start just by letting you know a few things about the divisions that we've got in our schools. We've got about 24 schools going into regular classes this week. So that means that the students are going into the classrooms that they'll be in with their teachers for the remainder of the year, and 24 of them are moving into those classes this week. 3 plan to go into classes next week, and 1 is just waiting for some further information. They have a little bit of a different scenario. So in June, we increased division in 3 schools and decreased by division in 5 schools. And presently here in September, we've increased by a division in 5 schools, and we haven't decreased in any yet so far for September. So I will pause here, and I'm just going to take a little bit of a diversion and talk a little bit about the whole classes and divisions. And at this time of year, parents are often wondering why elementary students don't immediately go into their regular classrooms for the school year. And so at this time of year, August, September, student registrations and transfers increase a lot. This means that student numbers at each school can be somewhat uncertain. So an increase or decrease in student numbers at a school could mean that a class division or teacher could be added, removed, or there could be significant changes made to the class organization, to those grade groupings. We don't often know what these numbers are going to be until after school has officially started. So in the first week of September, staff use this time in many ways, but I'm going to share 2 ways mainly that staff uses this time. 1, for school-wide activities to create and build community, and it may include things like school expectations, practices, values, and establishing who they are as a school community. And 2, staff can continue to carefully observe to ensure, as best as they can, that students are placed in the best possible classroom setting. As we know, children can bond quickly to adults in their lives, so we want to keep these changes to a minimum. And something we did last year and we continued in part this year was leadership teams at each of our schools, elementary and secondary, last year phoned, as you know, every single family just to see where they were at, what their plans were. We continued that this year to a certain degree. Certainly students that maybe were elsewhere last year, their home schools have phoned them to just check in to see how they're doing, if they're coming back, or if there was anyone that we were worried about. We gave those phone calls, and this year we also sent out a registration confirmation letter. That was just to let families know, hello, we're your home school. You're receiving this letter because we're expecting you to come to our school on September 7th. So that was something a little bit different, but boy, that really helps us to ensure that we can move into those class divisions sooner rather than later. So having 24 already moving this week, by Friday, moving into their divisions is a really, really good result. Okay. So elsewhere for school startup, we've had already a number of principal, vice principal meetings in August and September. We've reviewed and reflected on the last year, and we've brought some closure to last year. We were able to discuss and plan focus areas for the coming year, primarily around compassionate learning systems and inclusive education. We, of course, had to review the communicable disease guidelines and familiarize ourselves with the parameters of the K-12 education in this regard. And as you know, the highlights being in-person learning, right? K-12, no cohorts, certainly the mask mandate for grades 4 to 12, and many of our normal and highly rewarding activities are now permitted, such as extracurricular activities. So this was super good news in schools. We are taking a slow approach to meetings or gatherings in person, and we're starting with virtual meetings when and wherever possible, and moving to sort of small gatherings and then potentially to larger gatherings over time. And we'll sort of see how things go overall in BC, and of course we'll adhere to ministry guidelines. So on a more informal note, I'd like to go informal now and just let you know that unprecedented elementary schools are happy and alive with the sound of children. And speaking with all of our principals, as I said this week, they have staff that are happy, smiling kids, smiling parents, lots of positive energy, like we're, you know, phone call after phone call using these same words over and over again. And there were a lot of new faces, and 40 new kids in one school, and in another school, 1/3 of the kids were new. So it's been an exciting time. So in speaking with principals, one principal wanted to extend a thank you to all senior staff, you know, learning services, facilities, HR, communications, registration, finance, for just a beautiful, smooth startup. And I've never had a phone call like that, so I just thought it was really important to share it. In these grade groupings, in this time before schools get moving into their divisions, they do whole school activities. As I said, they use this time very well. They use it very wisely to focus on things like the core competencies, or maybe social emotional learning. One school used the learning of how to make cedar roses into a metaphor for how their students feel about their own learning in a classroom. In other words, they were able to walk a mile in their moccasins. And they're in their second year focusing on Shi Iwan, which is kindness, Hui Iwan, which is generosity, and Stli, which is love. And this is their second year focusing on that. So I'd like to share one last specific example with you of a elementary school startup activity. Just bear with me. It's a story of a focus text. So lots of schools might choose a book that fits into their school goals or their code of conduct. And this year, this particular school chose the book, The Grizzly Bear Who Lost His Grr. So these focus texts, or this approach, can really unify a staff, and they can unify a whole school. So every teacher in the school, every educator received this book. They all shared it out with the students at the same time, and they all worked together to come up and build common themes that they took from the story. So The Grizzly Bear Who Lost His Grr is about a top bear in the forest, and he's in the forest one day, and in rolls this new bear who kind of wants to take over the top bear spot. And so they hold a big competition, right, to see who's going to be the top bear. And there's a whole pile of events, and these two bears are battling it out, and they're neck and neck, and up until the very last event. And the last event is to measure who's got the biggest grr. And that night, when they go to bed, the new bear sneaks into the top bear's cave and he steals his grr. So the next day when they have this competition, the top bear doesn't have a grr. So when everyone realizes that, all the forest animals in the forest help out the top bear, and they all grr at the same time, and their grr is louder than the new bear's grr. It's so loud that it shakes the new bear, and out of his coat falls the grr that he stole from the top bear. And of course he's beside himself. He's embarrassed. He apologizes for stealing this, and top bear, of course, really understands, and he forgives him, and they have a lot more in common than not. And so from this story, the students of this particular school and the staff have come up with these 4 themes, and I'd like to leave you with them this evening. The first theme from this story is everyone needs help sometimes. And I really want you to think about this and how it might pertain to all the adults out there, and the adults in a school as well as the children. Sometimes people make mistakes, and we don't always know the underlying reasons behind those mistakes. Forgiveness is powerful, and reach out to each other, because we all need friends. So that is a very typical experience, a very typical startup activity in any one of our elementary schools. Thanks. Over to you, Don.
Thank you very much. And I won't resist from saying that was a great story, because I know it was. I apologize. Thank you so much. And I'll just I won't go over a lot of stuff at the secondary level, because a lot of what Assistant Superintendent Tate has talked about is a similar experience at the secondary schools. Schools have welcomed back their students, both returning and new, and it has a very positive, good energy throughout the system. Everyone's excited to be back and excited for the opportunity, and there's some trepidation in the system as well. As you think back to the summer of 2020, for secondary schools, they were reorganizing into a quarter system, right? They were going into cohorts and really tightening down restrictions. And then as the year wore on, mask mandates came in. So the 2020-2021 school year truly was a year of increasing restrictions, and we tightened up through most of the year. And when we left in June, most people were hopeful, as they were throughout the province, that school would return to normal for September. We know that we haven't returned to normal, but we do anticipate that this year will be a year of decreasing restrictions. So we're starting off the year with some restrictions that we expect will be loosened or removed as the year goes on. So this is that gradual transition, as people refer to a more normal schooling experience, or our new normal as we go through. As was mentioned, some of the guidelines from last year are continuing. So, the proper hand hygiene, mask wearing, all of those safety and cleaning protocols are still in place. Fortunately, some restrictions have been eased, and it has provided some opportunities for schools to start the year in a very positive way. So there are no cohorts, which has allowed secondary schools to return to a semester system. They've maintained a double block, so they've put a double block within their system, which allows for some of those extended block times that people really enjoyed in the quarter system, while returning to a time frame that allows them a little longer to get through the entire course, which the semester system does. There are simple little changes, like the ability for students to look at their schedule and go and make an appointment with a counselor to change courses. Last year, there were no course changes. We put students into cohorts, and there was no movement at all. So I talked with a principal this morning about how yesterday went, and he said there were 250 student meetings with counselors around their timetables for accommodation. So you think of that at one school and one day, the number of students and schedules that will be balanced and fixed is a real step forward for those schools and students. Food. Last year we didn't have cafeterias running at our secondary schools, and now food services are allowed to resume. So there's schools are looking at how they get their cafeteria programs up and running in a safe way to provide a pretty important piece of schooling, if you can remember back when you were a teenager attending school. The simple ability to use lockers is an exciting thing. In most years, you have 20% of your students, just your grade 8 students, who don't know how to open up a locker. So there's a learning experience there as they work through it. Well, now we have all of our grade 8s and all of our grade 9s in the system who have not experienced lockers. So there's two out of every 5 students walking in the hallways. This is a new experience for them. So there's a learning piece there. Not to mention all the social piece of those students in grade 8 and 9 who have experienced cohorting experiences, and now they'll open up those social opportunities to interact with students, which is a big piece of secondary school. And not least is the opportunity for our extracurricular sports and clubs to resume under the guidelines of those individual sports. So they have safety protocols in place, but extracurriculars are able to happen. Field trips are going to be permitted this year, which is huge. We will see things like music concerts, theater productions, dance showcases, and presentations. So schools are excited for that. As was mentioned, it's a gradual transition. Some indoor gatherings will start online. They will go to small groups. They will go to larger groups. We're hopeful that if the health guidelines allow and the ministry guidelines allow, we'll have whole school assemblies by the end of the year. So returning to some of those features that allow a school to really show who they are and come together and build community. So schools are excited for that. I don't have such a lovely Big Bear story as Laura shared, but I do know that if you drove past John Barsby this afternoon after school, they were hosting an exhibition football game with Mount Doug from Victoria that came up to begin the football season. And just hearing the cheers of kids and seeing parents, as you do at a John Barsby game, right, sitting on the hood of their vehicle, watching. It just felt like school, right? It felt like September should, right? It's the beginning of a new year, and kids returning to those things that they love. So it is only the second day of school, and there's lots to be done. But I would just want to raise my hands to all of our staff and our students and our families that are making this a positive start to the year. And we know that there's going to be some anxious folks around some of the as the restrictions and things change throughout the year, but it's we're off to a great start. We're very excited for the year.
Thank you both very much. Does anyone have any questions or comments? Okay, seeing that, question from Chair McKay, and then, okay.
Thank you. Through the chair to Ms. Tate. First, thank you for teaching us through story. I appreciate that example that you shared with us this evening. A different way of learning is much appreciated. My question is related to the additional divisions that you thought about, that you were talking about. Given that we've seen those additional divisions added at the elementary level, do you have a rough estimate of how many students are new to our district for the enrollment piece?
I wish I did. I am so sorry. I'm unable to answer that question at this time, but I see the Secretary Treasurer pop on, so that might be helpful. Excellent question.
Through you, Madam Chair, so right now we are still a little bit early in the process, given that our secondary schools will likely be releasing some students to other school districts, as well as we really won't have that final number in secondary until September 30 when we actually see who shows up. But looks like we are already slightly over 100 elementary over budgeted, as well as around 200, well, and that's conservative on the secondary front over budgeted. So add another 70 students to what we budgeted. So we could be looking up to 400 or even more. But again, that's very preliminary based on some of the work that's still being done in the system to move kids in and out of schools. But it's a very large number at this point.
Do
you have a follow-up, Chair McKay? No, okay. Trustee Stanley.
Hi. So I have a question and a comment, one for each of our presenters. So I can either do one and then put me back on the list, or I'll do both. I'll follow your lead. Chair Berzovich, I'll start with my question for Mr. Balcombe. I appreciated your acknowledgement that in secondary schools, we have really 2 grades that are actually learning the system and new things about how to be in high school and what does that look like and where lockers are and all that stuff. And so that's kind of the nature. I'm kind of hoping you can talk to me a little bit more. I know we're good at this, or not good, sorry, that we're used to doing this at an introductory grade 8 level. It's the grade 9s that I'm actually worried about. And as a mother of a grade 9 student, we've already had this, I don't know where the locker is conversation. It's more that I'm actually thinking about the culture of secondary schools and understanding what it means to get involved, what even the activities are, like even having knowledge that you could go search for those things, I think is something that I'm concerned about that our grade 9 students don't have because they never had that introductory year. So I'm wondering if you could just talk to me a little bit about how we're transitioning the grade 9s, a quick version of their grade 8 experience up to grade 9.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, an excellent question, and that is something that was that question's kind of been percolating with schools since September of last year, right? When this year's grade 9s came in as grade 8 students, and many of those school community culture opportunities didn't occur, right? There wasn't the here, let's have everybody come out and play volleyball, let's sign up for clubs, let's get involved. And so, that's been a conversation throughout last year, was what do we do for this year's grade 9s, right? Because they are truly new. They're not new to the academic piece of schooling, right? They know how to get to this classroom, that classroom. They understand the academic side of high school. They've lived a year of it, but they haven't lived that transition piece into and just the social piece. How do I form social bonds, right? If we think of typically grade 8 and grade 9, you make friends groups, your friend group falls apart, you reform, you do that again, and that all happens because you intermingle with a large group of students in your age. And this year's grade 9s, for the most part, spent last year in grade 8 with a very small cohort of classmates, right? Their social group was quite small. Their opportunity to become fully immersed in the school community was limited very much, right? There's no field trips, there was no sporting events, they didn't get to do a band concert, all of those things that normally are not there. So those students, as you said, are kind of a new group of students. They're in grade 9. The challenge is, of course, developmentally, students coming into grade 8 have a balance between I want some independence, but I also want some guidance. I'm new to the school. I need the adults to kind of nurture me along the way. Grade 9 students tend to be a lot more reluctant to say, you know, lead me into what this experience is. I've got it figured out. So there's a new challenge, a fresh challenge for schools to say, how do you have a open and welcome, high energy opportunity for grade 9 students to become part of the culture when developmentally they've spent a year in that building, right? And they're at a different place. So that is a challenge, but it's definitely one that all of our schools are looking at. And if you look at it narrowly through, you know, the lens of an athletic director, they're saying they've missed a whole group of students to have a chance to become part of their athletic culture. Our theater programs are the same, right? They haven't had their grade 8s, this year's grade 9s, be able to go and watch theater productions if that's what they're interested in, or dance. So all of those things that happen as part of the school culture, we really do have a double group that need to have that extra attention paid to them.
All right, did you have a follow-up question?
Just express my gratitude that I'm glad that you're alive to this issue, and that I do think it's compounded by a year of isolation. So I think it's, you know, it's even more compounded than just a year. It's a year of isolation. So I'm, you know, grateful that we're actively thinking about how to transition these students. So thank you.
Yeah. All right, question from Trustee Keller.
Thank you, Ms. Trustee Brzovic, through you to perhaps Ms. Tate. Thank you for the presentation from actually all the staff. Tonight's been excellent. And I guess my question is very similar to Trustee McKay's in a sense. And I'll just start by saying I was a bit surprised when we received the email from McGirr, where my youngest son goes, that indicates there are almost 100 new students coming into the school, a combination of new people moving to the area, people returning from Island Connect Ed, and it just struck me at some point, and I know this is early, we're only on the second day, and I understand we'll do the counts a little bit later. Will we find out across the district kind of where we're at with new divisions and space requirements for all of our schools at some point?
Yes, absolutely. We can provide you with all of that information. It's all very succinct. And as you said, Trustee Keller, just give it a few more days until we can sort of solidify things. And then that's really easily accessible. That information is very easily accessible.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay.
Trustee Stanley, did you have another comment you wanted to make?
I did. Thank you. And this is for Ms. Tate. 2 comments. 1, wow, really impressive girl. 2, it was really good. 2, I'm really struck by your story and the learnings from the story, because after speaking to a lot of parents, I've been really struck by how exhausted, and we're all exhausted, how exhausted parents are and how they feel this school year is just something they're just trying, or start up, just trying to survive, and they just don't have the energy to do anything beyond like get lunches and get them to class. So when you told me the kind of lessons of the story, everyone needs help. Sometimes people make mistakes. Forgiveness is powerful, and reach out to people because we all need friends. I really think that the parents need to hear the story. So I, besides trying to subtly or not so subtly encourage you to like do a little event for the school district, I'm actually thinking, and I'm not kidding, I am thinking that message, I'm hoping that's another message that can go out, is just how exhausted parents are, and you know, just trying to survive to get the kids to school. And so your lessons are not just for the students, but I think the parents and everybody in our learning communities really need to hear your story and your GER. So thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much. And thank you for recognizing that the message is absolutely universal.
Yes, it is. And we have a new speaker tonight representing the NETA is Megan Zimmer. Welcome, Megan.
Yeah, hi. Thank you very much for that that welcome. Yeah, I am the professional issues officer for the NDTA. I'm like the new Joe. Yeah, I'm still working on like trying to get even close to Joe. But yeah, I'm excited to be here for my first Board of Ed meeting. I'm not exactly sure this is the right spot in the agenda for this question, but I'm just going to put it out there. Just thinking about coming back to school and safety for everybody in the building, and there is a mask mandate through for folks from 4th through 12. What policies, procedures, assurances do you have in place to keep everybody in the building safe if people refuse the mandate?
Don, do you want me to?
I was going to say, go ahead, or do you want me to do it, or I see the superintendent might want to weigh in?
Any number of people that probably could respond to this. Superintendent, would you like to start, or?
No, feel free to start, and I can jump in.
So I'll just start with a bit of an opening, and I'll ask Scott and Dawn to jump in a little bit. Thanks, Megan, for your question, and welcome to your new position. The one and only Megan. I'll still remember Joe. So yeah, so when I think about your question, and I think about, from my purview, sort of students maybe that aren't able for whatever reason to not to wear a mask, we always have to remember that school is an absolute right for everyone. So we are welcoming and open for all students, regardless of whether or not they'll wear a mask. We want to be as supportive as possible. We want to share, just like we did last year and the year before. We're going to share lots of information. We're going to teach children in a beautiful, inclusive and compassionate way. We are going to share all the pros and cons. We are going to build routines into our classrooms, all the supportive ways that we have been doing for the last 18 months. This is not going to be any different. This mask mandate is the same as it was last year. So we are certainly going to be proactive, instructional, educational in our approach. And as you're well aware, Megan, we have from the ministry that we've contextualized here in Nanaimo Ladysmith, we have our COVID-19 communicable disease plan that outlines just about every detail that imaginable in all aspects of keeping students and staff very safe in our schools, as we have always had for the last 18 months. But I will pause there to see if either Scott or Dawn want to jump in.
Yeah, I'll just share. Thanks, Laura. That was very very comprehensive in that response. For the mask mandate is a continuation, and so I think, as much as lots of folks over the summer were hoping that it wouldn't be the case, it is. And in my checking in with secondary folks is it's the same as it was in the spring, right? Students come in, they mask up, and they're aware of those places. The biggest change for secondary will be cafeterias, right? Because last year they didn't eat in cafeterias, so the idea of masking up as they're moving around and only taking the mask off while they're eating and drinking. So, and schools have always, as Laura said, acknowledged that not everyone can wear a mask, and there's always issues around being mindful for those who are anxious about people who are not wearing a mask, but also respecting that some people are anxious because they're not able to wear a mask, right? So that and that's an issue that schools navigated last year, I think, very well.
Well, maybe for my turn. Good evening, everyone. Hi, Megan. Thanks for the question. I'll just add my 2 bits. And of course, masks are but one layer of protection. Staying home when you're sick and washing your hands and following those other protocols are, of course, very important as well. And I'll just add my 2 bits about vaccination as a safe and effective way to keep everyone safe. And you'll probably hear me this year often sharing my views on vaccinations. So we would never make any assurances, of course, Megan, but we will continue to follow the provincial health officers' guidance, as well as our local medical health officer and the Ministry of Education. Thank you.
Thank you. That was a very comprehensive answer, and I certainly appreciate that because I know that I've heard that question from a few parents too. Do we have any other questions or comments before we wrap up? Okay, seeing none, I just want to add how much I appreciated this presentation. Laura, that story is lovely. And yes, I agree with Jessica. You're going to have to do that for us again, and we can really dig into it some more. I really appreciate that what I heard tonight was a real balance between bringing us back to starting to be more like what we're used to and more normalcy, with a balanced and acknowledgement that some people are not there. And although we haven't had the caseloads of some of our partners or fellow schools in Fraser Health and Vancouver Island, Vancouver Coastal, that there is still concern on the island, and especially as ferries. And so I really appreciate staff's acknowledgement that we still have parents and probably some staff who are worried about being back without cohorts and with the slightly less protections, and just moving slowly on the big groups is greatly appreciated. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Tanya, you're muted.
I muted ahead of time. Sorry. I would like to hand the meeting over to Chair McKay for a moment to introduce our next speaker as we get into item 8.3.
Great, thank you. So over the course of the past, I suppose over the course of the past year, I have represented the school district and the school board at the Vancouver Island Trustees Association, often answering questions that come up at those meetings around, stories of success around what our school district is doing. Related to that, the BC School Trustees Association has an Indigenous Education Committee that often puts out questions to board chairs via the branches that we serve. And so what I had proposed through an agenda request was to have these questions that have come out sometimes on a quarterly basis to be brought forward to the board for our knowledge, to increase what we do know about that we're doing, make those connections to legislation, make those connections to UNDRIP, that type of thing, and then also just truly to ensure that we're doing as much as we can to educate not only ourselves but the public about Indigenous education and its importance across this country right now. So I've brought these questions forward from the BCSTA for our board to learn about and to have discussion on. And with that introduction, I will pass it over to Deputy Superintendent Davey.
Sorry,
Tim, you're muted. Do you want to come down and help you, or do you want me to introduce Ricky? Yeah, Ricky, why don't you go? Yeah, Ricky, I think Tim was just trying to introduce you. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Thank you, Deputy Superintendent. I'm just going to share my screen here. Laura, can you see that?
Yes, I can.
All right. Good evening, everyone. Before I review the information sheet that I was asked to provide this evening, I thought I would take this opportunity to introduce myself, as it's the first time addressing the board in my new role. So yes, my name is Ricky Bartlett. I was born on this beautiful Nanaimo territory, and I am grateful to be raising our children here with my partner, Brett Hancock. We have a 3-year-old daughter named Mavie and a 5-year-old firecracker son named Maclay, who is starting kindergarten this Friday. So we are busy and an emotional household this week. But we are all of Cree ancestry and part of the Mid-Island Métis Nation. A little bit of background, I have been working within Nlps since 2007, first as an Indigenous support teacher, then a classroom teacher, and for the past 9 years as a vice principal, with the exception of this past school year as acting principal of NDSS. This year I have been given the opportunity to lead as Director of Instruction for Indigenous Learning. And I can tell you I'm just so honored to be able to help lead Indigenous education in our district with all of you. I have been spending most of my first few weeks visiting the nations and getting to know our Indigenous partners one-on-one, and just really listening to their hopes for our Indigenous students in the district, and hearing their concerns as well in these strange times. So I've been busy collaborating with our team in finding the best ways to move forward in engaging these students in school this year. And yeah, I'm just really excited with the opening of schools this week so that I can get in there and meet the Indigenous support staff and meet with school principals and really just build a plan of support for this school year. So I was asked to provide an information sheet this evening with a focus on 4 main topics that relate to our district goal of truth and reconciliation. And while I was gathering this information, I kept hearing the voice of Auntie Joan when she addressed us in our Welcome Back meeting last week. She was stressing the importance of getting to know yourself again. You know, she was speaking about the weight of the world and just the busyness of life and the busyness of doing this type of work. So just giving yourself space and time to really reflect on who we are and how we got here. And yeah, so going through it, it just made me realize how important it is to reflect on who we are and how we got here as a district. And just recognizing how far we have come really shows us what we can accomplish together moving forward. So anyway, thank you for this opportunity to do just that this evening. Switch my slide here. So yeah, the 4 main topics of this information sheet starts with Bill 41 UNDRIP, basically where, you know, truth and reconciliation, the world movement started with the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, September 2007. And I think that it's important to recognize that although Bill 41 started policy changes and shifts in the federal and provincial levels of government, Nanaimo Ladysmith Public Schools has actually been dedicated to improving education and really talking about creating these environments of equity for our Indigenous learners long before this bill was introduced. One thing that we believe as a team that it did do as it began to ignite the TRC calls to action and the adoption of DRIPA, the BC version of the United Nations Declaration, was really build a culture of collective responsibility within our district around truth and reconciliation. It became part of our organizational framework, being embedded into our district goals and our school goals, which really made everyone equally responsible for moving Indigenous learning forward. You know, from our Board of Trustees right across to our students in the classrooms. You know, it's also led to the strengthening of relationships between the district and our surrounding nations, and it's really put Hulkaminam language revitalization as a priority within our district culture. So moving forward on the timeline, we have the BCT, the BC Tripartite Education Agreement, which is a document endorsed in 2018 in collaboration with the Canadian government, the BC Minister of Education, and FNESC, which is of course the First Nations Education Steering Committee. So basically, it's a provincial agreement that promotes bilateral decision-making around education and Indigenous student success between First Nations groups and school districts. And what it's done for our district is really make us accountable to each other in a formal way. And by working together, it continues to, again, strengthen our relationships with the nations, you know, as we regularly collaborate with one another on the best ways to support our Indigenous student success and our Indigenous communities that surround us. And we do this regularly. One example would be through Leaders for Learning. So our NLPS district goals support the BCT agreement in you know, prioritizing the teachings of Indigenous cultures, values, and of course the Indigenous language within our district and school goals. Which brings us to the third topic, Indigenous language within NLPS. Again, I believe we've really created a collective responsibility around the revitalization of the Hul'qumi'num language. We have 7 teachers at various schools in the district working with students and staff in teaching Hul'qumi'num this year. I actually had a call from HR yesterday with a new teacher application who had level 1 Hul'qumi'num and was seeking to get more training to be fully qualified. So that's really exciting. It's out there and it's really becoming part of our culture, and people know that it's important to us, and they're seeking out the opportunity to learn more and be a part of it. And then also I've been working with TED and principals this last week in tweaking the secondary schedules for Hul'qumi'num language blocks, and for the first time Hul'qumi'num will be taught at every high school in our district. So that's really exciting. Principals are really excited. So it continues to grow each year, and yeah, we hope to just keep supporting that growth with our commitment to training more and more teachers in this area. So the fourth topic is something I didn't know a lot about, but got the opportunity to dive into their website and get to know a little bit more about BCSCA. British Columbia Schools Trustees Association has an Indigenous Education Committee who produces a knowledge series. And it really features the history, culture, and language of Indigenous people. So I attached the 3 articles that have been produced in Appendix A, and the other 2 are expected to come out later this fall. But the publications have a purpose of building knowledge and understanding for trustees in our province. And again, just really shows how far-reaching the commitment to truth and reconciliation is for BC schools. And again, just really fostering that collective responsibility piece for the entire educational community. So it was really exciting to dive in and actually see that that's what is happening for you all. So, you know, in looking at all this stuff and reflecting through preparing for this presentation, you know, we really are where we are today due to the dedication and passion that you all have for Indigenous education. We all know that it starts at the top, and the dedication and passion to move forward in our journey to truth and reconciliation really shows in this district from the top. And yeah, it just makes me so proud to be part of it. And so thank you for that, and thank you for asking me to speak tonight. And I look forward to working with you and getting to know you all.
Thank you, and we look forward to working with you and getting to know you. Question from Trustee Higginson.
Hello, Ms. Bartlett. It's so nice to have you joining us. Thank you. Thank you for that presentation. I have a question, and I know that you have been in your role for about a hot minute, so somebody else maybe has to answer this, and don't worry, I totally understand. because it's about BCT and it's about our district's collective responsibility to live up to some of the expectations under BCT. And one of them is, and I noticed it's in the BCSTA handout about enriched student data. And in particular, there is a robust section in BCT on data collection that talks about a purposeful approach to data collection. The data being referred to, which is also referred to in BCT, is FSAs in particular, along with the numeracy and graduation data. And I'm wondering if our district's low participation rates in the FSAs has an impact in our ability to, really participate in that purposeful approach to data collection. I don't know if you know the answer or not.
Tim, you want to?
Sure. Yeah, thank you. And through you, Madam Chair, thank you for the question. What I would suggest is that there are many data sources for us to be looking at, and you've mentioned the low participation rate for FSAs. One thing that we can look at is we can look at previous years information around the FSAs, but more importantly, I think we can look at other sources. And for us, the board is very familiar with the work that's been introduced over the past few years with the Department of Learning Services and through Ms. Bartlett's predecessor, Ted Cadwallader, really around the red, yellow, green data collection, and really requiring schools, school staffs and teachers to really dig into a number of areas, but awareness and knowledge as to how our Indigenous students are doing across the system, K-12, and reporting that back to the district. So it's asking a number of questions and inquiry for teachers to take a look at, for school staff to discuss, and start to decipher how they can best support our Indigenous learners within our system. So, I'll just note that FSAs is one source of data, and we've got a lot of others, including the vast wealth of knowledge that our teachers have as to who our students are.
Yeah, perhaps if I could, Chair, jump in on this. Take your silence as a yes.
Yes, absolutely. I was nodding.
Yeah,
I couldn't unmute.
Thanks very much. Well, Deputy Superintendent Davey is absolutely correct on the other sources of data. This is data that the BCT is asking for, and this is the data that they use provincially. And so the challenge, of course, is that our participation rates were the lowest they've ever been this year at 51%. 10 years ago, they were 93%, higher than the provincial average. And this last year, they're much lower. Of course, we've, as a board and staff, we've talked about FSA and that the BCTF is against them, and our mandate is to get completion rates up as high as possible, and back and forth it goes. And we've debated this quite a bit. But what is absolutely true is that it becomes more and more difficult to glean any useful information from results that we can't say adequately reflect the whole population. So as the rates get lower, it gets more difficult to really get any decent information. And so that's a challenge for BCT, as it is for most districts. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Okay, I see that Trustee Higginson has another question, unless you have a follow-up to that question, Trustee Higginson?
No, I don't have a follow-up. I have another question though, but I will say on that.
Yeah.
Is there another question?
Is there anyone else who has any questions before I? Nope. So you got the floor.
Awesome, thank you. I will say, just as a follow-up comment though, it is very clear in BCT percentage of students who are meeting or exceeding expectations for reading, writing, and numeracy in grade 4 and 7 FSAs. So it's tricky, right? We're in that fine balance. It's tricky. So my other question actually is about, you talked about in your presentation, let me just pull up the exact wording, bilateral decision making between First Nations and Nlps focused on quality education. So really one of the things about BCT is that it's not just about improved outcome, but also about First Nations control over education. And again, District Principal Bartlett, you might not have the answer to this because it's been like 4 days, 4 weeks. We're counting them still in one hand. So you might be on to the second hand. I'm just wondering if I was actually quite pleased that our district was ahead of the curve on this, which was the Indigenous Education Council, which is a requirement of BCT. And I wondered if the implementation of BCT actually hadn't required or created any changes of the composition or the way that the Leaders for Learners Council worked, or if it was just already working in the way that was expected under BCT and we didn't need to make any changes.
So just to clarify, your question is, based on the BCT document that came out in 2018, was the Leaders for Learning formed due to the BCT, or was the group already formed prior to that and just happened to fit in to that piece?
Yeah, I know the group was operating before that, but I'm just wondering if there were any changes that were required to the way the group operated because of BCT coming in, or if we were just, you know, once again, blazing the trail and doing great.
Through the chair, may I share a word?
You may.
I can only make an assumption here right now, Trustee Higginson, in that Ms. Bartlett's predecessor, of course, Ted Cadwallader, was very much involved with BCT and was very knowledgeable in this area. Now, our Leaders for Learning is an advisory council that has existed for a long time, and there have been no changes to the composition of that group, of that advisory council, from 2018 to present. So my assumption would be that we were already meeting those requirements, but we could, I'm sure Ms. Bartlett could certainly look into that and get a more clear answer, but I think we were probably in really good shape already before the BCT dictated this aspect.
Absolutely, and one more thing too that I believe was added in 2018 with BCT is the transportation agreement. That's one addition that I know is new to the table.
Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any other questions. Well, thank you, Ms. Bartlett. I really appreciated and enjoyed your presentation. Welcome to your new role. I'm sure that we will greatly benefit from having you in it.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're very welcome. Our next item on the agenda is 8.4. Superintendent Saywell will continue our district review story.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, I'll ask trustees to refer to page 27. You will recall on June 23rd of last school year, I shared this draft district review story with the board. And so after this evening, pending changes, that district review story will be sent to the Ministry of Education. So while the document largely speaks for itself, I'll share a few things about the report this evening and then turn it over to trustees for questions. So the Ministry of Education's framework for enhanced student learning requires that school districts submit this 10-page document, ours is 12 pages, on or before September 30th to the ministry each year. This is the first year where it's been a requirement. So if you click on page 27 of your agenda, that does take you to the document. And our document is called the district review story. Some districts call their document the framework for enhancing student learning, but we've been doing this for a little while and we wanted to keep the name. So it requires the framework for enhancing student learning requires a number of things, not the least of which is a long-term plan that is renewable yearly. So the Learning Services Department and other departments have renewed their commitment to the plan. We do this every year, and that's seen in the operational plan. And we saw a few changes last year. The board is working, has worked over the summer on renewing their commitment to our strategic plan, and that work is going to continue over the next couple weeks. So this document requires various data sets that include things like the 5-year dogwood completion rate, foundation skills assessment results, and as well as learning survey results. So these data are released by the Minister of Education at various times during the year, and staff typically share this information with the board as soon as we get it. And depending on when the information becomes available, dictates what information is in our district review story. For example, you will see in the district review story completion rates from 2019-2020. The district review story is a 2020-21 document, but we won't receive last school year's completion rates until about November or December. Similarly, I didn't receive last year's 2020-21 foundation skills assessment results until late last week. And so while we still have a few weeks to add that to our district review story because it's still draft, the ministry has asked us not to include it this year, and so we'll be including that data next year. So the ministry dictates the data that's required, and to say this, I would say the district review story is sort of a simple set of measures that demonstrates sort of overall effectiveness of school districts in BC. So that's sort of the ministry's intent. And while I would argue no district, no province, no jurisdiction has sort of a simple set of measures that all at once encompass the most important factors that are vital components to a strong education system, can be used at the school and system level and understood by the broader public. This is what the ministry's intent is by requiring this data in this document. So that's what it proposes to do. And so I'll say this, when you read the Nanaimo Ladysmith Public Schools district review story, you can certainly conclude that this district is moving in the right direction. Graduation rates in most categories at an all-time high and have been steadily improving over the last few years, certainly during this board's tenure. We have a lot to be proud of in NLPS, and I will predict that we will continue to see improvement in the years ahead. And with that, I'm not going to go through the data. Trustees have had a couple months to look at it. This is still draft, and we can make changes before we submit to the ministry. But we have a full complement of Learning Services Department personnel, as you've seen this evening, to answer any questions trustees might have. And of course, any information we're unable to provide this evening, we can bring back at some point, or perhaps you could ask for a report on whatever information that you deem necessary. With that, I'll put it back to you, Chair Burzovich.
Thank you, Superintendent. Are there any questions or comments? Trustee Higginson.
I have a lot of questions. And so my understanding, I think, too, is this is going to be at the board. I don't know, maybe I'm misunderstanding, but I'm just going to ask my questions. And if someone says, ask these questions another time, that's fine with me. My first question is about completion rates. And I appreciate you talking about them going in the right direction. And I'm wondering if the completion rates that we see, for instance, on page 10 of the district review story, 5-year or 6-year completion rates, 84% under all residents, 76% under 5-year. Is that dogwoods, or is that the combination of dogwoods, adult dogwoods, and evergreen completion certificates?
Yeah, thanks. Through you, Chair. Great question. It's all a little bit confusing, and the language that the ministry uses confuses it a little bit more. So you're absolutely correct. The BC Dogwood Diploma is awarded to students who are on regular track that we all know about, 80 credits in grade 10, 11, and 12. That's included in the completion rate. The adult dogwood also included in the completion rate is for students 18 years and older who are on a slightly different path, but the adult dogwood is on par with the regular dogwood. The one that's different, and strangely enough, it's been called a school completion, and it doesn't count to the completion rate, is the Evergreen Certificate, which is intended to celebrate learning that's not recognized as graduation, right? So this is for students who have some special need and are on an IEP and have met the goals of their IEP. So that completion rate, dogwood, adult completion, but not the evergreen. In summation.
Thank you.
All right.
I just want to clarify,
Yep.
follow up, if that's okay.
Yep,
thank you.
absolutely.
So I just for clarification, when we see that 76 or we see that 84, it's a combination of the dogwood and the adult dogwood, but does not include evergreen.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
I'm not seeing any other speakers, so if you have a few more questions, I will allow you to continue for a little while.
I will just keep firing them out then. Thank you. I'm curious about where's my next question? FSA data that is reported and our ability to, so on page 9, we've got our grade 4 reading, writing, etc. And we have 3 years reported. And I'm wondering if it's would be a better data point for us to report 4 years, because for instance, the 17-18 students in grade 4 would then be the 2021 students in grade 7. Am I correct there? There's a 4-year gap. Yeah, and I wonder what your thought is. I know that you're a bit of a data nerd as well. And I wonder what your thought is in terms of the ability to actually, what I would love to see is, so this is where they were in grade 4 and this is what we see in grade 7 and looking for improvement. Is there a reason that wouldn't work? Or is there something that I'm missing in terms of the ability to compare those cohorts over years and their possibility of improvement?
Thanks, another great question. And I saw Assistant Superintendent Tate flash on the screen, so I might ask Ms. Tate to respond.
Sorry, I should stop doing that.
Sorry.
It was an accident. No. I think it's actually a really, really good suggestion, because not only would it provide sort of that longitudinal data, sort of where we could follow a cohort from grades 4 to 7, you know, or even further, but it'll also give us the year-to-year data where you would be comparing cohorts, but at least it would show us increases or decreases from year to year. So I do think it's a really good idea. It may have been, I'm not sure, it may have been just maybe the size of the graph or just kind of fitting things on there, but I don't see why we couldn't include that, but I'll open that up.
I too think it's a really good suggestion, and this is you know, maybe why there's draft on this. We completed this document according to the ministry's requirement, and it's not that we can't add information. It was just sort of our first take on doing it and you know, submitting it to the ministry. So we kept it sort of to the guidelines. But I think Learning Services and I need to have a further conversation about your suggestion. It's a good one. Thank you.
Thanks. And Tanya, just my quick follow-up is, like, I don't think you need to change it for this particular report is my feeling, but I think that maybe in the future, or when we're discussing it, it would be great in the future, because I know everybody's really got a lot going on right now, and it just helps. I think if we did it, it would help with the sophistication of the data and the ability to have the more nuanced information. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. I think that's a good point, Trustee Higginson. Trustee Stanley has a question.
Hi. Since I followed that suggestion, I'll just agree with it. And it's partially related to my question in the sense that 4 years would allow us to a little bit to better understand when data is actually just a function of a blip, because data varies and sometimes changes in data aren't actually meaningful because they're just the randomness of the data rather than actual learning trends. And so more years will allow us to see better information about trends. So what my real question is it's actually a question about the FSA data and looking at the writing data. And so when I look at the data, what I see, pretty much across the board is a general increase across the years. But for writing, I see a decrease. And I'm wondering if we have any information, if we've looked into why. Do we think that this is, a real artifact of something that's going on in learning, or do we, back to that notion of a data blip? Just curious, because that does seem to be the anomaly among the general pattern of trends. And so I'm wondering if we have any thoughts about that one.
Yeah. Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. I think, Ms. Poulin's here. I was going to say perhaps Ms. Tate would come on the screen as well, and we can just have a conversation about this. I've had a number of conversations with Ms. Tate, and I know she talks about these things with her team. So, Ms. Poulin, perhaps I'll turn it over to you if you'd like to respond to that.
Good evening, and thank you so much. There's a couple of different pieces that would happen with this for sure. Part of it is cohorts. It is, different students. The other part sometimes actually is the writing topic. The writing topic is, often you'll find in classrooms, teachers can have their writing topics be something that they've been discussing in class and is ongoing. And when it comes to the FSA, it might be one that doesn't quite fit with what teachers have been doing. So sometimes there's a year that we just hit a topic that is provided that doesn't necessarily settle as well with students. And so those are some of the pieces for sure that can happen. Having said that, it's always good to take a look at the data and to go back and reflect and have the conversations with teachers about what they're seeing in their writing assessment and how the development is going for sure.
And through the chair, if I may add, everyone here is well aware that we've had quite a strong focus on reading here. We are also now beginning to work on the reading-writing continuum. Many teachers are very familiar with this and are very advanced in this regard, but we certainly do well in what we measure, and we can see the results that our district-wide focus, district-wide emphasis has had on reading, and we are broadening that focus to writing and numeracy.
Excellent. Thank you. I see Trustee Higginson is back on the list. Oh, I'm sorry, Trustee Stanley, you have a follow-up.
I do. I just wanted to throw out another idea out there. Not that we're going to be able to deal with this, but what strikes me about writing, at least this kind of writing, is it does require sustained attention. So math is a quick, calculation. Reading comprehension requires some attention and basically to hold the story in mind. And it's really recall memory. Like, do I recall or recognize memory? When I see it, this comprehension piece, I throw it back on a piece of paper, whereas writing requires you to hold the information, sustain it, and then write it in a way that requires further attention. So that's the one aspect that I just want to kind of add to the conversation is we know that there's research that we're decreasing in children's capacity for sustained attention. And adults are decreasing their capacity for sustained attention too. That does have some associated with electronic use. But my point is that I do want to throw out the idea, or at least the question, if we, could this be playing could sustained attention be playing a role in our capacity to function with this kind of writing skills that do require that ability to hold information in your mind, not only the facts, but also the ability to communicate the facts in a written document. So just wanted to throw that piece out there as a question. Obviously, we're not going to answer that right now, but it's something that's consistent with the other data on learning patterns.
The answer is yes.
I like that answer. Thanks.
I do too. Trustee Higginson.
Thank you. So while we're on the results section, let's talk about numeracy. Because I think it would be remiss if we didn't have somebody out there talk about our secondary numeracy results, which are sort of right in the middle of all the provincial results. So that tells me that we got some funky stuff going on, and I'm just hoping somebody could, one, talk about it, and two, tell us what we're learning as a result of that and what we're changing and shifting in our district as a result of what we're seeing there.
Yeah, through the chair, I'm happy to talk about it. I'm not 100% sure I can provide all of the answers. As you know, the numeracy assessment as a graduation requirement is reasonably new in the province. We're about 4 years in, with about 4 years ago being a pilot year. For students, secondary, when you talk about graduation requirements, they pay attention. It's important to them because it's part of their requirements for graduation. They usually follow up with, well, how important is it? What else is it important for? And one of the pieces that is a driver for students is, does it count for grades? Is it tied to a course? Is it tied to scholarships? Is it tied to post-secondary admissions? And unfortunately, the answer to all of those questions is no. Which leads to lots of conversations with school staff around their results. So they quickly, they get the results, and it's a 4-point scale for the numeracy. And so teachers will look at a set of results from students, and it's not tied to a curriculum. So these are not necessarily math teachers, but these are teachers looking at results for students, and they're trying to figure out the numeracy results as they relate to that student's experiences in school. So they'll be like, this student received a 2, and then you're like, well, that's pretty, a 3 is proficient, 4 is kind of top marks, a 2 is not exactly a really high mark on a numeracy assessment. And so you ask questions about that student's numeracy skills, and you look for some of the indicators, and you go, well, they've completed pre-calculus 11 and they got 94%, and they've completed physics 11 and received 95%, and they're in a woodwork class achieving really top marks. So you would say they probably have pretty good numeracy skills. And then you wonder, well, why is there a result of 2? So you ask the student, hey, did the numeracy test, the numeracy assessment, your mark doesn't, it's a 2, it seems weird. And the student will say, well, I didn't finish it. I just did enough to kind of get past the mark because I know it's a requirement. So you're like, okay, there's one narrative story. Then you look and you go to a student who scores a 3. And you look at some of those same indicators, right, where there's pre-calculus 11 or physics or woodwork, and maybe their marks are lowered, so you're surprised that they're high. And so you go ask that student, and they're like, I don't know, the assessment just kind of makes sense. My brain thinks that way. And so there's a lot of pieces about the numeracy assessment that don't align with the curriculum, and they don't necessarily align with student motivation. On the upside, because the numeracy assessment is not tied to curriculum, this is a school-wide approach. Just like at elementary school, when they talk about reading as a reading, this is a school-wide approach. It's not a single subject area. Numeracy and literacy, the secondary assessments, are designed to test not curriculum, but broad numeracy skills. So those conversations where a student may be achieving high in subjects that we think normally would translate to high numeracy skills, they get a high mark in their math class, maybe their science class is high, their numeracy assessment mark is low, and you realize there's a lot of literacy tied to that numeracy assessment. There's a lot of reading in those word problems before you even tackle those things. There's some abstract thinking in those things. So there's some numeracy skill development that is not delivered in a specific curriculum. So there's really good work for schools to do around how do we increase numeracy skills throughout the system. The perplexing piece is, what do you do around the motivation for students when the effort is not always what you'd want it to be. So that's a province-wide challenge. That's not an NLPS issue to say, what do we make of our numeracy? It's how do we authenticate those to make sure that the results are pointing us in the right direction for what skills we need. So sorry, a very long answer to say it's a challenge, but it's an exciting challenge because, as I said, the schools are keen to have numeracy as be a school-wide approach. But it's frustrating when you look at some of the results and then you go talk to the students and it just doesn't match up, right? But it's a teenager making a decision that's part of their world, right? And as much as you implore them to do their best so that the school has, more authentic data to know where to go next, it's been a challenge to start with.
All right, I see you have a follow-up, Trustee Higginson.
Yeah, it's more of a follow-up comment. I note that you were talking about the grade not being attached to it and the large drop, which is probably associated with when those assessments changed from being those provincial finals. And it's also really good to hear all the work that's being done to, confirm that students are on track when those numeracy assessment comes in. That's really reassuring. It's too bad it doesn't show up in the data somehow, but I'm glad we talked about it because it might be kind of alarming to people, and now we can explain it if people bring it up to us. Tanya, can I ask another question? I'm so excited you guys were talking about learning and teaching. And
I will allow you because I have not seen anything else pop up in the chat. So please, anybody else, if you have other questions, jump in.
I know it's late, you guys, but this is really exciting stuff. Isn't it nice to be talking about teaching and learning and not I don't know, masks or dismissal times or anything like that. This is very exciting. So my other question is about the student learning survey data, and it's another one of those possible longer data points. We have only 2 years, which is probably the ministry requirement, and as we're all kind of getting used to this presentation of data, and to me it felt like it might be more valuable to actually see this over a 5-year period, because you could actually then, to Trustee Stanley's point, see trends. And I don't know if I'm wrong on that, or if you folks, I know you probably are reviewing it and keeping on it, but do these numbers, are they showing similar trends across 5 years when because right here we see just the 2 years. So I just wonder if it's similar numbers if we look at them over 5 years.
Yeah, I'll jump in because I've looked at that data. It is very similar over 5 years, and it's also very similar to, you'll notice I didn't include the provincial data as a comparator, which we have in the past. And I thought someone might bring that up, and my response to that is we're only in competition with ourselves. And so as long as we have in this case, it's just showing 2 years, and we could show more. Again, this is what the ministry requirement is. But it's been very close to the same over the last 5 years. Yes, you are correct. And if during agenda setting, trustees wanted to hear more about the student learning survey, we could do a presentation on that itself as well at any time. So.
I would enjoy that. Seeing that kind of a presentation. Trustee Stanley, did you have a question?
I want to ask why we don't have provincial comparators. Actually, that was my question, Scott. So that was funny. And this is why, not that we are in competition with anyone, and it was more in kind of a thought in response to my FSA question, but it's more, if we have the provincial data, it allows us to see the trends across the province and compare our trends to provincial trends. So why I think the provincial data is useful is if there's some reason that some data is being affected that is not about learning, it's not about what we do, then that data is going to probably show up in the provincial data. So, back to video games. I'm not trying to single out video games. It could be provincial strategy and increasing relationships with adults, or I don't know. My point is and you already answered the question, but I'm going to argue for inclusion of provincial data, not as a way of comparing ourselves to the province, other districts, but more as a way of being able to observe the trends across the province.
Yeah, through you, Chair. I don't disagree with the word you said, except for the part about singling out video games. I think we should all be singling out video games, and you know, maybe that does qualify. So, for us to do a presentation on some of these elements. And again, we kind of do that when they come out and we have a conversation with trustees about it. And to an earlier point, I'm kind of happy we're talking about teaching and learning as well. And I guess my answer to that is that you're right, and I was being kind of cheeky, I guess, that you know the race is with ourselves, and we're just trying to get better every year. But for all the reasons you mentioned, we could have provincial data in there as well. And again, the simple response is we did in the past because we were left to our own devices, and I thought it was good information. We didn't this year because we just really followed the ministry requirement this year. And so I'm hearing some pushback. We don't like that. So we probably have some changes to make. Thank you.
Thank you. Follow-up, Trustee Stanley? Nope. Yeah,
I'm good.
no. Okay, I'm going to go to Trustee Keller.
Thanks.
I'm going to go to Trustee Keller and then back to Trustee Higginson.
Thank you through the chair to Superintendent Saywell. I was hoping that you'd be able to talk a little bit more about the student learning survey and just what we're seeing is a bit of a longer term trend. From what I've read in the report, looks like that data has been collected since 2001. And is there, you know, given that, I don't know if last year would be an indicative year overall, given COVID restrictions and learning at home and whatnot. I'm wondering what the longer term trend looks like from that survey.
Well, I don't have that information through you, Chair. I don't have that information at my fingertips, Trustee Keller. But here's what I'm hearing overall. I think perhaps trustees would like to talk a little bit more about this and using some longitudinal data. So, you know, we can do that at some point, bring that sort of presentation to the board and give trustees an opportunity to ask some more questions about it. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. I'm going to go now to Trustee McKay and then back to Trustee Higginson.
Thank you. So I just wanted to make a suggestion to the board that when looking at student learning survey data, that is something that we put to our conversation around the board's annual work plan, because I believe that that's a cycle that we can add into our reporting out. And I think that we can determine where that report comes back in the next couple of weeks and make it an annual report within our annual work plan. So my suggestion to the board, I'll just leave that there.
Thank you. That's a really good suggestion, I think. Trustee Higginson has a question, a final question.
Okay, I'm limiting myself, but so this will be my last question, and we may not know the answer and it may require further information, but it's actually about adult dogwoods. And I noticed you mentioned earlier, Superintendent Saywell, about students over 18. I also know we measure 6-year completion rates. So my question is, if you could explain to the board the difference between an adult dogwood and just a regular dogwood. And also if we have, I mean, I know that there are ministry requirements around who receives an adult dogwood, but do we have, you know, how do we determine who receives an adult dogwood? Is it just actually adults who have come back to us, or do we have students who have been with us who are over 18 but have just never left us and are now on an adult dogwood? So I'm just looking for a little bit of information about the adult dogwoods and how we determine them in our district.
Well, I see Assistant Superintendent Balcombe, so I'll turn it over to him.
So to answer your question, is it just adults or are there students who have been with us all the way through? The answer is yes and yes. So we do have adults who return to us who may have left school at any time along the way, who say, you know, I really want to complete schooling. So they start as an adult. We also have students who have never left us, who have come year after year after year, struggled to have success, and they may have had little breaks, you know, where they've missed extended periods of time and not been successful, and struggle to earn their 80 credits towards graduation. And then they find themselves 18 years old and still a long ways from graduation. So the pathway to get to their 80 credits might take them a year and a half or 2 full years left to get to the 80 credits. And the ministry allows those students at age of 18 to go on to an adult dogwood certificate as opposed to the regular dogwood. And it just shortens the path. It has some required courses that they have to complete, but it just allows those students who have been in the system for a long time working to say, okay, I can now do this in a shortened period of time. There's 5 courses that are required in the adult dogwood once you turn 18. So the answer is yes. We have people that have left the system that come back as adults that say, I want to graduate. I've got post-secondary schooling that I need to do, and I need to have completed, you know, K to 12 schooling first. So we're like adult dogwood is the way to go. And we also have within our system some students who, as they're approaching their 18th birthday, their school plan becomes, the pathway to graduation as an adult graduate is shorter than it is to earn my 80 credits for the regular dogwood, if that makes sense.
Yeah, perhaps I'll just add a little further information and perhaps I'll share what the adult dogwood is first. It is for students who are 18 and over. You need a grade 12 language arts, math 11 or 12, and then 3 additional grade 12 electives, or a grade 11 social studies and 2 other grade 12 electives. The sad reality is that Indigenous students graduate with an adult dogwood at much higher rates than the non-Indigenous students. And Indigenous students on reserve graduate at even higher rates with an adult dogwood. So this is a concern. And you know, oftentimes we use that adult dogwood to get students through to graduation and on to other programs, because you can go on to post-secondary institutes with the adult dogwood, but it is lesser because it doesn't require all of the courses. So we're working on that.
You have a follow-up, Trustee Higginson?
Yeah, it's just Superintendent Saywell, what you were just saying really kind of piqued my interest, as well as knowing that this is an area of concern for FNESC, particularly students under 18 who may be receiving an adult dogwood, because I don't know if that's happening here, but I know that they have mentioned in presentations we've had before that they have concerns about that. And it would just, I think, be interesting for us as a board to have a further conversation with an understanding of what that looks like in our district. And it sounds like it's actually utilized in a really good way to help students move into the next phase of life in a really constructive way. But just understanding more about our rates and who makes up our adult dogwoods, and sort of, you know, how do we learn from that, and what can we take from that information to help us improve the life chances of students when they're entering into the district as the little teeny tinies. So at some point, I think it might be good. This has actually been so fascinating. I've really enjoyed our conversation about this data and how much we've you know, sort of broadened and opened up the real learning questions that we have that can guide us over the course of the year. So thank you for all the time that was put into this and all the amazing choices and programming and support that you're providing to the students to give us the results that we have on these pages. Thanks.
Thank you. Yes, I completely agree that it was a really enjoyable read, actually. It is good to be talking about education again. I'm seeing nobody else in my chat box with questions or comments, so I just want to thank you for your presentation. If there's any, and we shall now go on to item 8.4 unless 8.5 unless you have anything else. Nope. Okay. All right, Secretary Treasurer Walsh, regarding our policy committee work plan.
Good evening, Madam Chair. Good evening, everyone. Well, that was a nice conversation. I did not hear a sufficient amount about HVAC, so Sorry. So this evening, just here to present the background around the policy committee work plan. I'll turn it over to the chair for perhaps further comment after a brief review. So this year, again, you'll see a slightly ambitious agenda, and I think that the committee did some very positive work. We've made some slight tweaks to the way the committee will actually function, and administration will be taking on a little bit more of the administrative side of things. Certainly that was falling on trustees last year, and I think we're hopefully going to change that up to reflect that work getting done in between meetings, which will hopefully speed a few of the policies along. Not too many changes from last year, but I just want to highlight a few of them. And again, I'll turn it over to Trustee or Chair McKay, perhaps for further comment after. But you will see there is the visioning of a review of the Transportation Committee added to the AP, or sorry, added to the work plan. The idea is that as the AP is coming forward, it will come forward based on the board's direction in the spring. That should be soon. But then again, the policy committee might have further changes that are required. Board's governance policy, and so this is something that staff has actually been working on to bring to the policy committee in the near future, just about changes to make sure that that particular policy reflects the practice of the board, aligns with Robert's rules in a consistent fashion, and just to cover up and modernize it a little bit as well, given here we're on Teams and we might be on Teams for a variety of different mechanisms, whether we're in COVID or not. Review of the surplus policy. There will be a memo coming to the next business committee recommending that the board start that process to align with ministry processes. Public disclosure policy, similarly, we are going to be required to have that updated. The timing, as noted, may be further back depending on some advice we're seeking externally right now. And then there's one other one I'll just note that's stemming from the long-range facilities plan, and that's a policy on district involvement in local and regional planning, and that's just the placeholder name that we've come up with based off of one of the recommendations in the plan. So perhaps that's the background. I turn it over to Chair McKay.
There you go. All right.
Thank you. Thank you, Secretary Treasurer. So I appreciate you being able to compile all of this on behalf of the committee. Essentially, I think where I might highlight for the board a couple of potential changes that we can contemplate with the adoption of this work plan. First, I would just like to highlight that the inclusion policy is noted at the top of our priority list this year. We expect that to come back from our Safe Schools Committee this fall, rather soon, for approval by the board, following review by the policy committee. Given the new items that were added, I think Secretary Treasurer Walsh covered that quite well, and the remainder of the items that are on the policy committee work plan are based on last year's work that was not completed by the committee. So we did undertake a good deal of work last year. There was very thorough conversations. A number of policies came back to the board, policies that hadn't been before the board. A couple of them, I think, were almost a decade old. So we are working through the process of continuing to update the policies. I think it's been, we've had a constructive couple of years. This is, of course, new to this board through the past of reviewing policy. And I think this policy committee work plan is reflective of where we started at this point a year ago, but not also including the growth of the committee and the additions, some of which are related to ministry policy changes as well. So I'll leave it there for comment by the board and hope that we see an approval this evening for the policy committee to get to work later this week.
Question from Trustee Keller.
Thank you. Through the chair to perhaps Chair McKay or perhaps Mr. Walsh. I was just wanting to know the status of the childcare policy that the committee recommended, I suppose, will be for the board, that was included in the minutes of the I think it's in our package here, so May 5th. I wasn't sure what the status of that was, or if that should be considered in the work plan.
So I'll take an attempt at that first. I believe that it is just an error in it not being included. There was a larger conversation that was to come, and I believe that we were undertaking the pilot program this year to give us some more information on which to base a policy as well. So perhaps Secretary Treasurer has more to add on that.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and yes, an oversight on my part, and we will adjust that. So perhaps we can adjust that for when the motion passes.
Thank you.
Follow up? Nope, he's gone. Okay, Trustee Higginson has a question.
Thank you. I think the chair answered it, but I'm just going to seek some clarification on that. And it is around the timeline of the inclusion policy. So the fact that it's not listed as one of these four are just additions, and these other things remain a priority, and that one's sort of at the top of the priority. So we're going to hear back about that one soon.
That's correct. So what we've done is the 4 items in the information sheet or the action sheet, excuse me, are brought forward as additions to last year's work that was incomplete. With the inclusion policy, we made a commitment in the spring to have that return back to the board and to the policy committee September, October. So we're expecting to see that information come back to the policy committee level quite soon.
Thank you. All right. Seeing no further questions, would someone please move the motion? Oh, Charlene, Trustee McKay.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm flipping through my pages now. So I'd like to move the motion that the Education Committee recommends that the Board of Education of School District number 68, Nanaimo Ladysmith, approve the Policy Committee Work Plan for 2021-22 as amended to include the child care policy.
All right, and I see seconded. Seconded by Trustee Stanley. And I do see a couple of questions that popped up just as we started the motion. So I'm just going to first make sure, is there anyone opposed to the motion?
Sorry, just a point of clarification. I'd like to speak to the motion before.
Oh, of course, of course. Yeah.
Thank you. So I just wanted to state that I appreciate the work that's gone in over the past year on this work plan and look forward to an approval by the board. But also I just would like to say that our intention this year is to embed the policy committee work plan as a component of the board's annual work plan, which is a living, breathing document that we will work from throughout this year to ensure that we're always touching base with our strategic plan. And I think policy work by the Board of Education is a big component of that work plan. And so it will be embedded within that document as well, following approval by the board.
Okay. We could do a motion to table, but I think we have allowed at times a little leeway. So I think I'm going to do that, and I'm going to let these 2 questions come in as part of this discussion. Trustee Keller.
Thanks, Chair. And I'll speak to the motion to try and keep in line here. So I support the motion. I think this is great work. I'm pleased to hear that we'll have some more staff support at the policy committee level. My question is more about process, and you know, that our work plan is quite ambitious, and perhaps through the chair to Secretary Treasurer Walsh, would there be any opportunity for us to consider either combining the consultation for a number of these policies to go out with, you know, maybe more than one policy at a time to the public consultation period? Because it's going to be very difficult to get through everything within a year if we're managing them on a one-by-one basis.
So Through you, Madam Chair. So the process will really, so the answer to that question is yes. Multiple policies can go out at the same time for consultation, and that's happened in the past. It'll all just depend on the timing that the board actually puts the recommendation. So the policy committee will bring the recommendation to the board. The board will say, great work, we like this. We want to put this out for consultation for 30 days, and it will completely be dependent upon that. What I will say, however, is the fact that there's a work plan here is kind of an open invitation to our partners as well to start thinking about it. And if they wanted, if there's concerns to be proactively brought forward, we will try to find a space for that as well. But absolutely, in fact, in order to achieve this, there's going to be multiple policies out in the community at the same time.
Chair McKay.
Thanks. I just wanted to add that at the policy committee level, I think that we have some more discussion around how do we accomplish multiple items at the same time. And so I think that that's a conversation to come, and likely probably where we start our year this year. That would be my suggestion.
Thank you. All right. Do we have any other speakers to the motion? Ms. Zimmer, I do see you. Would you like to ask is your question related to what the motion, or?
My question is not related to the motion. It's a process question. And actually, thank you very much, Trustee Keller. I think we were thinking the same things around process. I'm happy to save the balance of my question until the motion has passed.
Thank you.
You're muted, Tanya.
Pardon?
You're
I'm muted. Sorry, I was muted. I apologize. I'm seeing no further discussion on the motion, so I'd like to suggest that we vote on the motion. Is there anyone, first of all in favor? Anyone opposed? I believe the motion is carried unanimously. Thank you. And now, Ms. Zimmer, I will come back to you if you had your matters you wanted to.
Yeah, and this is really just a clarifying question because I am new to this. So I want to make sure I understand how it all happens. So the inclusion policy, and so I'm most interested in the inclusion policy. We have at the NDTA a social justice committee that is pretty fired up, and inclusion has already come up. I'm actually familiar with the inclusion policy because I read it the other day, or the current inclusion policy. So my understanding is it's getting worked on, being worked on. It will come back from the committee and then go out for consultation and then brought back to the board for approval to become board policy. Is that correct? Through to whoever can answer that question for me.
Trustee McKay.
Thank you. So what our process looks like in this particular case is that the inclusion policy currently sits with the Safe Schools Committee, of which there's an NDTA member assigned to participate in that consultation process at that level. And then that feedback will come back to the policy committee. The policy committee will review all of the feedback, produce the draft, refer that back to the education committee at the board level. And if approved at the education committee level, then it will go out to 30-day consultation after approval by the regular board meeting. Then we have another 30 days of consultation from the public, and any other further consultation at that point can come in from any of our partner groups, as well as it can also be added to our internal stakeholder meeting between the board and the NDTA as well, for an opportunity for consultation there as well. And then upon that 30-day consultation, hearing back from everyone, we'll be able to decide either to make amendments or to approve the policy after it returns at that point. It's a bit of a process, but lots of opportunity to be heard and included.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you for that very thorough explanation, Trustee McKay. Trustee Higginson.
Thank you. And noting the comment from Megan about the desire for the Social Justice Committee to review it, I'm just wondering, are there members of, I believe there are members of the NDTA on the Safe Schools Committee? And so it might be good for the two groups to connect so that that information can be received at an earlier time and tried to be worked in at the beginning, and then also just sort of saves another set of revisions. So there are members of NDTA on the Safe Schools Committee is what I'm hearing from the chair. Okay, thanks.
All right, I see no further questions. We have passed the recommendation for the board meeting. So this item is complete, and now there is no correspondence referred from the board meeting. We have no unfinished business and no new business. Miss Matthews, do we have any questions? No questions from the public. Thank you. At this point, then, I will seek a motion to adjourn. Motion to adjourn, Trustee McKay. Anyone opposed? Okay, motion carries. Oh, seconded by Trustee Stanley.